Shropshire in England is halfway up the English-Welsh border on the English side. And when we play rugby against Wales, you think you're playing Scotland's a bum fight, Donald Nelson. You wait till we play Wales. Just as a by-the-by, I can take you to a pub where the border between England and Wales goes through the pub. So the Welsh ones are on one side and the English ones are on the other. Anyway, we were talking about rugby union, and I'm sure that Despina and Simona, well, Simona will understand rugby. Do you watch the rugby Italians play? They were playing France yesterday, and everybody else is pretty, apart from Baba, he's an American, he doesn't understand sport. Okay?
No, I just don't understand sports because I'm not into sports. Wouldn't matter where in the world I was.
It wouldn't matter. In America, all you do is play rounders.
Play banjos? No, actually,
rounders.
In America, they call baseball America's sport. I think that's one of the most boring sports I've ever seen, but maybe that says something about America. But we're big footballers, not soccer, but football players, and then basketball. Soccer is beginning to really gain super popularity here.
Right, your football, no one else plays anyway. When you play international football, New Mexico play against it. Anyway, let's stop talking about sport and start listening to some stories. Right.
Hey, Mike.
So the batting order is going to be starting off with Donald. Then we're going to Baba, then to Janet, then to Simona, then to me. So that's the start. I'll follow it through from there. So if you please, as always, you're very welcome to be here. Mute yourselves while the stories are being told so we don't get any background noise or anything else. Okay.
Mike, one small request.
Go on.
May I do John's traditional opening?
Oh, sorry, I thought he wasn't there. Carry on, Baba. Do it.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and all those assembled, welcome once again to World Storytelling Cafes, and today we have our story round. And without further ado or a don't, let's get on the way.
Thank you very much, Baba. Right, so Chris and Gustav, if you can mute yourselves, please. Okay. So we're off. And Donald, away you go, my friend from Scotland.
Thank you very much, Mike. Right, we've been talking about whiskey, so I think I'll tell a story that involves whiskey. Old Neil lived in our village, Balloch, on the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. And Old Neil was a bit of a local character. He liked to wander about, a retired man, of course, wander about the village all day talking to folk, and he would go to the pub in the afternoon and he would go home for a sleep, and he would go to the pub in the evening and he would have some whiskey. And on the way home, he was pretty merry. And he would start to sing, on bonny banks and beyond bonny breeze, as you do. And he would pass by the minister's house. Now, the minister in Scotland is a vicar, like a preacher. We call them ministers. So the minister would be sitting in his house, which we call a manse in Scotland. So the minister's in his manse, and he would hear old Neil walking by every evening, beyond money banks and beyond. And the minister would think, oh, that man, I don't know what to do with him. I've tried to speak to him. I've tried to ask him to lead a better life. And he just won't. That's all he does, is go to the pub and walk by my house every evening, singing at the top of his voice and falling over occasionally. Well, old Neil, for all that he liked to drink and carouse with the other folk in the pub, every Sunday morning he would turn up at church. 11 o'clock service on the dot. And old Neil would sit in his pew at the front and he would listen to the sermon. But he would be sitting like this all through the sermon. And this annoyed the minister as well, because the minister thought to himself, is he listening to me? Or is he sleeping off that demon drink that he had last night? Well, one Saturday evening, the minister was sitting in his little office, and he was writing out his sermon for the next day. And he was wondering what to write. What could I write my sermon about? And I think in that respect, the minister might have been a bit like me, because the service is on a Sunday and this is Saturday night and he doesn't know what to write down yet. Just like me, when I sat down in this chair this evening, I didn't know what story I was going to tell, and I've had a whole week to prepare it. So anyway, the minister's sitting and he's wondering, what can I write? And old Neil comes by on bonny banks and by on bonny breeze, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond. And the minister thought, I know. I starts to write. And he writes, and he writes, and he writes. And he goes down to his cellar. And he gets a couple of things for the next morning's sermon. And he brings them up. And he goes down to his garden. And he gets a couple of things for the next morning's sermon. And he brings them up. And the next day, everyone from the village files into church. And they sit down, and of course, old Neil's there. And he walks in, always very smartly dressed, because it is church after all. And he walks in, and he sits down on his pew, right at the front. And the minister says, "Good morning, my flock." Isn't it a lovely morning? Today's sermon, I'm going to show you a little experiment. And today, I'm going to talk about the demon drink, the whiskey, or as we call it in Gaelic, ushkeva. And the congregation all go, "Oh, old Neil, he just sat at the front." And the minister puts his hand down and he lifts up a jar and he puts it up on the table. And he puts his other hand down and lifts up another jar and he puts that on the table. And he said, "Look at those two jars. This jar here is filled with water. And you can see in this jar that's filled with water, there's a worm. And that worm is swimming about quite happily. But if you look at this jar is filled with whiskey. And also there's a worm in this jar. But the worm in this jar filled with the whiskey, the demon drink. This worm is stone dead. What does that tell you about whiskey?" And old Neil lifted his head and said, "If you drink whiskey, you won't get worms." Yeah.
Now, I tell you what, Donald, it's funny because I've heard exactly the same story about Herefordshire cider.
I'll tell you a quick story about cider. I was at Glastonbury with John Rowe, as I do every year, And one day I finished my session. It was a really, really hot day. And I went to the beer tent. I went to the crew, the staff tent. And I thought a nice cold pint of cider. It was so hot. It was tropical. A nice cold pint of cider would be lovely. So I went in and I said to the barman, "Can I have a pint of cider, please?" And they said, "Would you like to try some of the local Somerset cider?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So he walked into the back. You're shaking your head.
You want to do that?
And he came out with a half pint of cloudy liquid. And he said, "There you go." And I took it in my hand and I thought, it's not very cold, but the guy's giving it to me for nothing. I'll drink it anyway. And I drank it and it was lovely. It was so smooth. It was delicious. And it really tasted of apples. And I drank this half pint of cider. And then I had to go back to my tent and lie down, and I slept for about 3 hours. Half pint of cider. And I was in the next day and I said to the guy, "That was strong stuff." And he said, "Yeah, it's about 25 proof." They don't sell it in the shops.
No, they don't sell it in the shops. That's right. Yeah, copper cider comes in a china mug with a black bottom, Baba. So you can't see through the glass and you can't see into the glass because it's green and it's got little bits out of it. Cider's made out of apple.
We have what they call cider here in the States.
Yeah, but it's not alcoholic.
No, it's alcoholic, but it's never. I think at best it's 5%, maybe 8%. And I'm looking for home brewed because they have more flavor, but they're harder to find here in the States.
Right.
You know? Oh, no, I'm sorry, micro brewed.
Yeah, it might. Donna, if you could mute yourself, and we'll go on to Baba. You're going second, are you, Baba?
Yes, but all this talk of whiskey, I have to share a whiskey story with you real quick. Traditionally, when I was younger, back in if I had a great meal, I'd end my meal after dessert with a cup of piping hot Irish coffee. And there was a restaurant that I used to frequent so much that the manager, the owner, and the main servers knew me and they knew what I liked on the menu. And they would say, your usual, and I'd say, of course. So one evening I was with a lady friend and maybe a couple other friends, and meal was great, so I decided to have my Irish coffee. It didn't taste right. So they bought me another one. It didn't taste right. So the server said, "You don't look happy." I said, "The coffee is off." So the manager came out and he bought me another one he had freshly brewed. Still didn't taste right. So to make a long story shorter, he said, "I don't know what else to do." He says, "We cleaned out the coffee maker. We opened a brand new thing of coffee. We brewed fresh coffee. And we even opened up a bottle of top of the line whiskey for you. And I don't know what else." I said, "Whiskey? I don't like whiskey." "Baba, you know Irish coffee has whiskey in it." I said, "Now this poses a problem because I always get Irish coffee here. So either the bartender was being light on the whiskey or there was no whiskey. But tonight, this won't do." He said, "I tell you what, why don't we make you a Jamaican coffee? Jamaican coffee has rum." I'm not going to say I had a lot of Jamaican coffee, but when I left there that evening, man, you know I was filling me cups. That's my whiskey story. Now my story. And I'm going to do an abbreviated version of my usual way of introducing my set. This story took place a long time ago. Yes, that was abbreviated. So this story took place, this story has many different alleged origins, but we can best say it was out of West Africa. And this story is about an Oba that thought a bit much of himself. But today I'm going to be non-traditional. I'm going to have some fun and I hope I don't offend. But this Oba's name was Oba Butters. And Oba Butters was the wisest man in the kingdom, for when he was younger, his parents sent him off out of the country, off the continent, for a proper education. Yes, I said education. So when he came back, he felt like he was better than everybody else. I mean, was he not the most learned? Was he not the most well-taught? Was he not the most well-educated? But in the village, there was a young man called Dagogo. And Dagogo was also called Wise Son. And when people had problems or challenges, they would go to Dagogo and they would seek his counsel. And more often than not, he would give them words of encouragement or tell them how to resolve their problems or their challenges. Well, word spread that Dagogo was the wisest person in all of the kingdom, in all of the Kijiji village. Oba, King Butters, heard this and was highly offended. He said, no. I am the wisest person in this kingdom. I am. Who is this Dagogo? Oh, that's Wise Son. Everyone says he's the smartest person in the... No. Bring me this child. And they brought Dagogo before the king. Now he said child, but Dagogo was in his teens. He says, what's this I hear that you call yourself Wise Son? He said, oh, my Oba, my king, I do not call myself Wise Son. It is the name that my friends and the other villagers have given me, because when they seek my counsel, I give them information that helps them resolve their challenges. I do not pretend to be the Wise Son. He said, Let's see how wise you are. How old are you? I'm perhaps 14 seasons. He said, go. 3 days from now, you and a group of other youth your age will come assemble to me, and I'm going to give you tasks to see just how wise you are. So a few days later, Dagogo and other young men around his age, give or take a little bit, were assembled before the king. And the king gave them some palm trees. He says, go. When I call you back here, you will have taken the oil from the palm trees, and you will bring me the oil from the palm trees. And he gave each of the youth a palm tree, but he gave Dagogo a dead palm tree. Dagogo looked at his palm tree and looked at the others. He says, it'll be so. And so they went. Now, Dagogo was trying to figure out how he was going to get palm oil from a dead tree. But you see, Dagogo was a very smart, very wise, and very beloved youth, a young man. Even the animals liked him. And the birds heard him thinking out loud, how am I going to get seeds from a dead palm tree? And the birds heard his challenge. And so the birds flew around, and each of the birds brought him back one seed. And there were many birds. And they dropped the seeds, they dropped the seeds, they dropped the seeds, they dropped the, you get the picture. Until Dagogo had enough seeds to press and make himself some palm oil. So when the king called them back, Dagogo had his palm oil. The king was flustered about how could he have gotten palm oil from a dead tree, but he couldn't say that he gave the youth a dead tree because people would know how devious he was. So he said, okay, you got lucky. He said, each of you, I'm going to give a chicken. When I call you back, you will bring me the eggs from the chicken. And he gave each of the boys a chicken, except for he gave Dagogo a rooster. Now, in this story, they would usually say cock, but that word has gotten different meanings to it throughout the universe, so I'm going to say rooster. And so all the others had hens, but he gave Dagogo a rooster. So they went back. And Dagogo's like, he gave me a rooster. What can I do? What will I do? I don't know what to do. So the king called them back. Well, none of the boys had eggs yet. So he said, well, while we're waiting for your chickens to lay eggs, I have another challenge for him. And he gave each of them a goat. He says, when I call you back, you will bring me the milk from your goat. And he gave each of the boys a nanny goat, except for the go-go. He gave him a male goat. They went, and the go-go definitely knew the king was trying to declare him not to be so bright after all, but he didn't know what to do. So when the king finally called them back, all the youth except for the go-go assembled in the courtyard. He says, where is this so-called wise son? Is he too ashamed to show his face because he's not wise? I will give him to noon to be here. And then I will send my guards to go find him, and we will deal with him. So just before the noonday sun was positioned in the sky, the go-go came running into the courtyard, panting, out of breath. Almighty Oba, Almighty King, I'm so sorry I'm late. But last night my father went in labor, and I was the only one there to deliver the child. And then my father could not nurse the child, so I had to take the milk from my goat to nurse the child. But while I was nursing the child, I realized I was going to run late. And I left the eggs trying to get here on time. The king said, you silly boy, I don't know what you're trying to pull. What do you mean your father gave birth? Men cannot give birth. And male goats cannot give milk. What are you trying to pull? He said, excuse me, Omani Obo, what did you just say? He said, men cannot give birth. And male goats cannot give milk. Oh, but roosters can give eggs? The king realized he had betrayed himself, and he looked at the go-go fiercely. And then he realized that he had one of two choices: to get himself off the hook or to look like maybe not so wise. So the king stared at the go-go and then broke out in laughter. Oh, young sir, you are indeed a very smart and very wise boy. For you have seen through my joke. You have seen through my efforts to be humorous. But you know what? I don't think I should send you home quite yet. I think I should make room for you on my council so that when I have a challenge, I can seek your wise words. And so shortly after that, the go-go, in all of his 14 seasons, became an advisor to the king. Now, the king did show some wisdom, for he was wise enough to realize that he could not embarrass his child, nor could he afford to reveal himself. Oh, by the way, wisdom and knowledge are not the same thing. Knowledge is what you know. Wisdom is what you do with what you know, and hopefully to improve the lives of those around you as well as yourself. So now that I've buttered you up, we'll go on to the next storyteller, Asante. I hope we didn't mind me using your name for the king.
Yeah. And so Baba, what's the difference between a doctor and a professor? If you've got the difference between wisdom and what do you call it? Wisdom and
knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah. So what's the difference between a doctor and a professor?
The price.
No, the professors teach the doctors.
Yes, this is true.
Right, so we will go along
you.
now. Now we're going to Janet now. So Janet is number 3, and she's from Staffordshire in the good old England. So she's still suffering the fact that the referee was blind and robbed last night when he was up in Murrayfield.
Yes, he was not a very wise referee.
Yeah, and he had no knowledge. Yes.
That's exactly right. I once told a little anecdote, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in the fruit salad.
I've heard that.
I think it's quite well known. But a short while ago, I was introduced to an elderly gentleman, a researcher, an anthropologist he was, and he told me that he had located a tribe, little known tribe, and he had discovered the origins of their name. And he was very, very proud that he was the first, maybe even the only European to have lived with them for many years. He told me how he had learned their unique and complex language. He told me too that he had learned to play and make the strange musical instruments. One of them was a stringed instrument. It was made out of the liana vines, the long vines that hang from the tree. The other was, I suppose, a little bit like our recorder. It was made from a woody stem, and it was very important that one dried the stem, for the sap in the stem was toxic. And if there was even a little drop there and you put it to your lip, oh, it would burn. You could never make music again. And he told me that he loved the food. He loved the food of these people. They were hunter-gatherers, so they would they would hunt and gather stems, fruits, berries, and leaves, and make delicious meals of them. But they did eat meat. They hunted for meat. Both men and women would hunt. Before the hunting party went out, they would gather together some special vegetation, stems, roots, leaves, and they would put it into an enormous pot over a fire. They'd add a little river water, and they would boil until there was just a paste left. And when the paste was cool, they would cover themselves from head to foot. Well, this paste had a sweet, sickly smell, but it was also sharp and sour. But the important thing about it was it completely, utterly masked the smell of the human. So any animal that was being tracked could not scent the hunter. Now the tribe was called the Omnes Tribe. And they were very clever, the Omnes, for not only did they cover themselves in the paste before hunting, they had a way of making a kind of velvety booty that they wore when hunting. They were very light-footed, but these velvety booties made out of soft leaves and a kind of felt-like moss would deaden any sound at all. So an animal would not hear the hunters coming. So the animal could not scent and could not hear. And then the hunters were ready. They took their blowpipes and they went into the high grass that covered the plain where they lived. And they looked for an animal to hunt. But there's something about the Omnes tribe that I really ought to tell you. Each of them, each person was very, very, very tall. So tall. Imagine for each one of those berries, it's a meter. 1 meter, 2 meter, 3 meters. Very tall. And this meant that if the animal should just turn, might see them, might see the hunters. But what the hunters did was they dropped to the ground, and If you've ever seen a toddler learning to walk, they knee walk. They walk, they knee walk. And this is what the tribesmen did. The hunters, men and women together, they walked on their knees. Sometimes miles and miles, hours and hours. And then, when they were kneeling just close enough to the animal, they would take their blowpipes and they would blow. And the anthropologist told me that all the time he had lived with the Omnes tribe, he had never, ever, ever known them to miss. But they would wait. They would wait until they were absolutely certain that the creature had drawn its last breath. Then they would jump up. As they jumped, they would cry out a victory cry. And the victory cry was the name of the tribe. And the name of the tribe was Omnes. And so they would jump up from kneeling down and knee walking, and they would shout, "Oh, my knees! Oh, my knees! Oh, my knees!" And that is how they got their name, the Omnes tribe. I do hope that you believe every word I say, because this was told to me by a very, very eminent anthropologist. Thank you.
Well, Janet, I think they must be cousins because there's a tribe in Africa and they're very small people and they live on the savannah in the great long grass. And they're called Where the Hell Are We Tribe.
Yes.
Because they jump up and go, "Where the hell are we?" And they come back down again. Okay.
Yes, I think they are related.
Right. So we're going to go to Simona from Italy.
Hello.
Hello. And we're not talking about the rugby, Donald. Okay.
So today I'm going to tell you a story I'm working on. So it's an experiment. Let's see if it works.
This is very good, Simona. Thank you for being here to do this.
Thank you. It was one of those nights when you better stay inside, because outside the wind was howling and a storm was going to break out. And inside the tavern, it was one of those nights when silence reigned. Nobody was speaking. Nobody had a story to tell. And you could hear every little sound. The clinking sound of somebody moving their fingers on the glass. The pouring sound of the bartender pouring another glass of ale. Somebody gulping down their beer. And one man looked at the other one in the room and he said, "Well, does nobody have a story to tell?" The others shrugged. "No." But where is that man? Where is the one who always has a story to tell? The one we call the storyteller? The others shrugged. They didn't know. The man said. And then he took his glass of beer and he gulped down half of it. And he had just put the glass of beer on the table when the door burst open and the wind came in, and with the wind, the leaves and a hooded man. And the man came in and he shut the door and he went to the bartender and ordered a beer. And then he took his cloak off, and the man who had spoken before said, "Hey, you! Here you are! The storyteller, come on, tell us a tale." But the storyteller didn't turn around. He just took his glass of beer and gulped down half of it. And then he put his glass of beer on the table and said, I'm in no mood for a story today. Oh, come on, said the man. Nobody has a story to tell. Come on, tell us a story. I told you I'm in no mood for a story, the storyteller answered. This weather reminds me of something dreadful I did once. I don't want to tell a story. And then, silently, he walked across the room and he sat down and he put his glass on the table. Oh, come on, said the man. At least tell us the story of what happened to you that night. And so the storyteller sighed. He took a long breath and then he started to tell his story. I was working as a ferryman and I helped people cross the river. I took them from one side of the river to the other, rowing my boat. And one day I was working on a net when a man came. He was an old man and he was dressed in fine clothes and his head was held up high. I knew from the beginning that he meant trouble for me. So I continued working on my net without looking up. And the man came to me and he looked down at me and said, Well, are you the ferryman? And without looking up, I nodded. And will you help me cross the river? He asked me. If you pay me, I said. And will the crossing be rough or smooth? And I looked up for the first time, but I didn't look at him. I looked up at the sky. And I saw some clouds, but you know how weather can be, so unpredictable. And so I looked at him and said, I don't know nothing. And I saw his face become red with anger. You don't know nothing? Have you ever studied grammar? Have you ever learned how to speak? No, I said. Well, he continued, then you have wasted half of your life. And I looked down at my net again, and I started working. Then I asked, Well, do you want me to help you cross the river? And he took 2 coins from his purse and he tossed them to me. And so we started the crossing. And we were in the middle of the river when a storm broke out. And the waves became high and rough. And I looked at the man in front of me. He was clenching on the boat, his knuckles white as his face. I looked at him and I smiled. Well, have you ever learned how to swim? I asked him. His eyes widened. No, never. Ha, I said. Then you have wasted all of your life. And I dove into the water and I swam ashore. And without looking back, I walked to my house. And only when I was there did I realize what I had done. I had left this man to die in the middle of the river. He didn't know how to swim, and only because he had been unkind towards me, I had left him there. And from that moment, I live with the regret of what I did, and I will never be able to forgive myself. And the storyteller went silent. He had finished his story. And with him, all the room was silent. Until one man in the corner of the room stood up and walked towards the storyteller. And the storyteller's eye widened. But are you a ghost? This can't be true. I left you on that boat. The other man smiled. He was an old man dressed in fine clothes. Yes, you left me there, but I was lucky enough, and a fisherman found me, and he saved me. You left me there, and I'm sorry I was unkind towards you. No, interrupted the storyteller. You were surely unkind, but what I did is unforgivable. The other man smiled again. Well, I forgive you. And I think we both learned something from that moment. I think we learned that a gesture of unkindness should never be followed by another one. I think we both learned that a gesture of unkindness should never lead to another one. And I think that tonight we have something to celebrate. So bartender, please, another round for everyone. And thank you.
Thank you. Right, so on my list now it says me. So I guess that's me. So now in the country I live in, which is England, which is part of the United Kingdom, which is part of a Commonwealth, which means that we have peoples from all over our world that are subjects to Her Majesty the Queen. Now, my Queen has been my Queen all my life. I'm happy to be an Elizabethan. I'm 67 years old, and today her father died 70 years ago, and she became Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth and all the other duties she's had. And she is a wonderful, wonderful Queen to me. And she also was married to an old boy called the Duke. Everybody called him Duke Philip or the Duke around here. Now, I don't very often do this, but I'm going to take this out of the American tradition and tell something a bit more personal than I normally do. Because a few years ago, on a train that went from Liverpool to London, in the first class compartment, there were 4 people. It was raining and it was cold and it was winter. And there was the Right Reverend David Shepherd. And he was the Bishop of Liverpool. He used to play cricket for England. There was a Mr. Patrick Rust, who was my father. And he was an after-dinner speaker, and he told jokes and he told stories. There was a Royal Duke, His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Duke Philip. And he was born in Greece, Despina. He came from a Greek family, he was. And he became the consort to our Queen. And there was another fella that my father never told me who he was, but they said he was some kind of politician, and they didn't rate him very high. And years later, I found he was a Labour politician, a fellow called John Grocott, I think he was named from, or Grocott, and he was sort of a colleague of Tony Blair's, and he was a cabinet member, an MP. And like I said, it was cold and it was wet, and it was about 7 o'clock in the evening, and they obviously just started telling stories and jokes, and they started going around telling stories and jokes. But after a bit, the 3 of them went quiet, and they let the 4th one just keep telling stories. And when he stopped telling stories, the Duke Philip, they prodded him a bit with another couple, and they set him off, and they did it again. And he sat there for about an hour and a half, just telling stories about the royal family, his children, and all sorts of things. And the bishop from Liverpool and they knew each other. And Dad would chuck in a couple. So I've got 5 brothers and a sister in those days. I haven't got them anymore. So and they're all quite short stories, the ones I know. So I'm going to tell you 4 shortish ones, finishing up with the one that I hope you're all going to tell as we start talking about the Queen's 70 millennium in the UK and in other places like Italy and in Greece and America and wherever. Because the first one is this one. The Queen is being visited by the King of Tonga. Now, in those days, the King of Tonga, now our Queen Elizabeth, she's about 10 stone. Now, 10 stone in Americans is about 140 pounds. I don't know what it is in kilos, but it's not very big. She's about 10 stone, about the average to the people and ladies I'm looking at. And she sat on a horse on a cart with the King of Tonga, who's about 30 stone. That's about 400 pounds in America. He's the biggest guy you've ever seen. And the cart is like this, right? And it's going down the road. And so the horse on that side, they're trying to keep it up. And the Queen's trying to be nice. And there's a few people around. And it's 11 o'clock in the morning. And they're off down to the Houses of Parliament so he can meet the Prime Minister and everything else. And just as they go round the corner, the horse farts. Now there's two horses in the front, and the one on the right did the biggest wet fart you've ever heard in your life, according to the two people who were sat there. And we weren't, and I don't think the Duke knew the King of Tonga very well at all. But the Queen is well known for being a proper horsey woman. And the description was the wettest, loudest fart you've ever heard in your life. And she was a bit embarrassed. So she turned round and she said to the King of Tonga, "Oh, I am sorry. That shouldn't have happened." And the king looked round and said, "You should have kept quiet. I thought it was the horse." The second one was this. Now, it wasn't, the Archbishop of Canterbury we've got at the moment is a fellow called Leonard. He's the right most reverend bishop, or the most right reverend bishop. He's the king, he's the top bishop, he's the Bishop of Canterbury. And he's, of course, he's the Queen's official faith advisor, is the word we use it now. But we're not talking about the one we got at the moment, because she, like prime ministers and all sorts of different people, she's had lots of these in 70 years. So we're going back 2 or 3. So we're going back to about the 70s and beginning of the 80s. And the old boy who was doing it at the time was coming up to his 3 school years and 10. Now, 3 school years means a score is a very old medieval way in England and in Scotland and in Ireland and Wales of saying 20. So 3 scores is 20 and 10. So you add that up, that makes 70. And so the clerics, the people in the church, they go, "When are you going to retire being a bishop?" And they will answer, "To this day, 3 school years and 10. And that means they're going to retire when they're 70 years old. And this old boy was about 67, 68. But very sadly, he got some very aggressive cancers. And he lost an awful lot of weight. He was quite a big chubby lad. And then 6 months later, he'd lost, nearly half his body weight. And he would look drawn, and everything. He had those chemotherapies and everything else. But it came to Christmas time. And he, of course, he hadn't been able to do his duties in Canterbury Cathedral because he'd been unwell. So the number 2 bishop had been, and all his colleagues had been taking it over and everything else. But it came just before Christmas. It came to a service in Westminster Abbey where the Queen was going to attend with her husband and everything else. And he was absolutely determined to be there. So he told all the doctors, "You've got to give me the medications to do that. I've only got to survive about 3 hours. I've got to sing a couple of carols. And I'm just determined to be there to welcome the Queen to Westminster Abbey on Christmas Eve." And so he was there. And as the Queen came up the steps, she looked at him and she went, "Vicar," she said, "isn't it nice to see you in church?" And the vicar, the bishop, looked at her and said, "I've been a vicar and a bishop for nearly 55 years. I'm always in church, unlike you. And you need to come a bit more yourself, really." Well, the Queen looked at him and he looked at the Queen, and they both laughed at each other because, as the Duke said, not many times you turn around to an Archbishop of Canterbury and say, "Isn't it nice to see you in a church?" So that's the second one. The third one, now there's, where are you, Baba? I can't see you on the screen. Where's Baba gone? He's disappeared. There he is, I can see you. Right. You had a president in the United States of America called Ronald Reagan. And he came over and there was a great big banquet. It was in the middle of Buckingham Palace, and it's a state banquet. That's when we do everything top dollar around here. We have all the flunkies, and we have a procession that goes round, and it's the Duke and the Queen, and then there's the President of the United States, who was Ronald Reagan, and his lady wife, and they go in as 4, and they all sit at the top table, and there's so many knives and forks. They go that way, so far out. And if you ever sit at a banquet, it's easy. You just go outside in, okay, when you get into that situation. Don't worry about it, because the dessert spoon's always closest and the little knives always at the top. Just go outside in, right? And you get 4 glasses of wine, glasses and all the rest of it. And they're just coming up to the soup course, which in that case would have been the second course. And the waiter turns over, puts the soup in front of the Queen, who promptly this time herself does fart. And she turned around in complete horror to Ronald Reagan, who started chuckling because he's going. Then in complete embarrassment, she turns round to the waiter and went, "James, will you stop that, please?" And the waiter turned round and said, "Yes, ma'am." He said, "Which direction did it go in?" Right. So we told one. Now, the Duke told this one himself. And I have had it reliably informed because David Shepherd, who's long dead now, was the Bishop of Liverpool. I did meet. Not very often. There's a couple of times he played cricket for England and everything else. And the second time I met him, I asked him because I wasn't quite sure I believed my father. And there's lots of reasons why I wouldn't believe my father when it comes to these kinds of stories. And it goes like this. Now, he was up in the Highlands of Scotland. Now, he was up at a place called Balmoral, and I don't know how far Balmoral is from Heather and from Diana, from you, Donald, but it's the place where the Queen, as we all know, spends a lot of her time and everything else. And the Duke, he'd been off meeting some of his pals, and basically they'd been hunting, and in the evening, they'd had a bit of a meal, and they'd drunk far too much. Now, this was going back in the day, so we're going back into the 50s and the 60s now. Now, in the UK and probably most all over the world, the exhaust pipes would stick out of the car about that much. So if this is the car, the exhaust pipes would stick out the back of it. They don't tend to so much nowadays, but in those days, it was thought they had to stick out a bit because the fumes would come back into the car. So he was driving by himself in the Highlands about 10 o'clock at night, and the sun had come down and the mist had come up. And you know what the Highlands are like? They can be when one world meets the mist. And if you're down there and it's going through the country estates and everything else, he came out of the big estate. That if there's plenty of places where there's the Dukes of Argyll and big estates all over there, and he was up in one of those. But he had come down onto the council road. He was completely by himself, and he turned around and he got lost. Now, instead of going straight on, in his words, he turned left, or the road merged one way, and he suddenly started going back up the side of the glens again, and he realized that he got lost. And he didn't want to go right the way up to the top because it would have been in the winter time. It can get ice and snowy up there and everything else. So he decided that what he had to do was to stop and turn around. So he stopped. And as he turned, we all done a 3-point turn. Well, he was doing about a 48-point turn. In this lane, he was going backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And every time he came into the back, he went into the bank. And at some point, the exhaust pipe went into the bank and clogged up. And so now it was full of soil. And that would stop the engine. That stops the engine. That clogs up the engine. But he managed to get it far enough round. And he started rolling back down the hill, back onto the council road. So he goes back onto the main road. And it's now about 10 o'clock at night. He's still in his full DJs. So he's got his black tie on, his black suit and the bow tie and everything else. He wasn't wearing a kilt by all accounts. It was just a conventional black tie, but he had tails as well. And so he started, and the car won't stop. But he does realize what's happened. So he goes and gets the starting handle out of the front. Now, the starting handle, for those of you who don't know, is one of those old things you used to stick in the front of the car and start going like this and start it going round. And he goes to the exhaust pipe to clear the exhaust. So he sticks it up the exhaust pipe. And at this point, he's got the starting handle up the exhaust pipe, and he's going like this to clear the soil and everything out of the back of the car, of the exhaust, to get the car going. That's when the police car turned. Now, there were 2 Scottish Highlands policemen. They both get out of the car. They both walk over and they see His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, the consort prince to the Queen, and all the other titles that he's got on his hands and knees with a starting handle up the exhaust of a car. And they say to him, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And he says, "I'm trying to start the car." So they breathalyzed him. And it's the only time he's ever been breathalyzed. And I don't know what the results were because they were never published. But according to somebody else we know, and I wouldn't like to say, like, dob anybody in or anything else, but on the mantelpiece of the Princess Royal, where she sits in her living room, there's a little frame. And in the little frame, there's a drink driving test, one of the old-fashioned ones, and underneath it says positive. And underneath it says, "That's my dad." Right, like I said, a couple of short little stories about the royals, because I think the royals have been absolutely beautiful in our family, and particularly the Queen, who's sat on her throne now for 70 years. It was 70 years to this day that she died. And I hope you enjoyed my short little stories. And I can sit here for once in the whole of my life and say this: every one of them's true, because we know where we got them from. Okay? Right. So now we're going to go to Greece. The Despina. Well, Despina, my screen keeps moving around, but there you go. I can see you now. You're above Baba. You used to be underneath Baba, but we won't go into that. Right. So, and then we're going to Chris Lowe after here, Chris. And then afterwards, Rona, are you going to do one? Put your thumb up if you are. Rona, you go after Chris, and I'll sort the rest out after. So, Despina, Chris, and then Rona. Despina, over to you. Despina, I can't hear you. Right, she's plugging something into her. Wait a moment. Ah, I can hear news. I can hear something. Can you say something, Despina? I can't hear you. You've got more light.
How about now?
That's good.
Okay.
Good.
Sorry for that. I was trying to get rid of the headphones because I destroyed the atmosphere. But
your headphones make you look even more beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So may I entice you with some Greek mythology again? You know, it's my favorite. Yeah? Okay. So this is one of the oldest, the most ancient tales that have been going on since the first gods appeared on the earth, the first 6 gods, before there were 12 of them. So it starts like this. Where is my daughter? Have you seen her? Please, if you saw her, let me know. This is a heart-aching mother. Please tell me. We look exactly alike. If you see my face, my daughter looks exactly like me. Tell me, please. Did you see her pass from this land? These were the words of the goddess. And she was right. When she was young, the 2 of them looked pretty much the same, although now, with all the heartache, the goddess's beauty was fading. She had been looking for her daughter Persephone for days now. The great goddess Demeter, goddess of the agriculture and of the land and of the blossom and of the crops, who had done so much for humankind. She was desperately looking for her baby daughter now, but she was nowhere to be found. She remembered the time when they looked exactly the same when she was young herself. She was but a young lass, and Zeus' eye had caught her. And we know Zeus, when his eye set on a female, no matter if it's a mortal or a nymph or a goddess, there's no escape. She had tried to escape it, but he had turned himself into a bull, one of his most favorite transformations. and had her by force. She was devastated afterwards, and he had regretted his act. There was a ram nearby, and he had castrated the ram and left the cat parts on her lap in form of repentance. Now she knew her brother, she knew he could not help himself, and he was not one to ask for apologies unless he actually meant it. So she had accepted his apology. And it was but a few months later that she had given birth to the most wonderful baby. Her skin was white as an eggshell, and her hair was long and all curly, and it was the color of wheat in a field, and her eyes were green as the fields were. She was the apple of her mother's eye. They would do everything together. Together, they would look after the land and make sure that everything blossomed. But, as time went by and Persephone became a teenager, as teenagers often do, they kind of drift away from their parents and spend less time with them and more time with their friends. And thus, Persephone found herself in a field, gathering flowers and singing and laughing with her friends, the sirens. And she was picking up flowers because she wanted to give a lovely bouquet to her mom. She got a bit further apart from the rest of the company because there at the edge, at the bank of the river, she had seen the most beautiful flowers. As she bent to pluck it, the earth shook and rumbled, and a great big chasm opened up. And from the gap, out came 4 black horses, pulling after them a black chariot with a hooded figure dressed all in black on it. Now the girl was stunned. She just stood there in stupor, and the chariot just came toward her, and the guy on it, the driver, he grabbed her in his arm and turned around and led his chariot into the same gap he had come out from. And behind them, the earth closed, and the only sign that was left was some withered flowers. When her friends, the sirens, realized that she was gone, they started looking for her and calling out her name. And they walked and walked, but they could not find her. So they went back to her mother. Now, Demeter was worried sick. Immediately, they started looking for Persephone. They called out her name again and again, but they could not find the slightest trail. Demeter turned the sirens into bird form. They kept their heads, the girls they were, but their bodies were turned into birds, so they could fly up high and from above maybe see some sign of where the girl was. But it was no avail. So she kept walking the land. After their failure, the sirens went and inhabited the island. We know that was to be their natural habitat from then on, luring the sailors into their death. But the mother would not give up. She kept on looking. She kept on walking. And every time she would come across a familiar face, she would ask them, what has it that she went as far as Marrakesh, and there she saw a familiar face, and she asked, John Rowe, can you show me where my girl is gone? But John Rowe said he was sorry that he couldn't. And on she went, even overseas. She met another familiar face, and then she asked, Babasi, did you see where my lass is gone? But Babasi said, I'm sorry, my lady, I can't. All the way back to Europe, when she saw another familiar face. And she said, Donald Nelson, did they mention I'm looking for my girl? Have you seen her? Please speak out. But of course he couldn't. she even met Maiden Prince and said, Maiden Prince, it's been long since you've seen my girl. And Maiden said, sorry, my lady, it is. She said, Keith Butters, my heart's in shudders. Please tell me, have you seen my lass walking up this land? But Keith said, I'm sorry, my lady, I haven't. Nobody had seen the girl. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So she kept walking and walking for 9 days and 9 nights, having no food and nothing to drink. Now, 9 days and 9 nights, we say, but this is God's time. We don't know how that transforms into human time, yeah? In another mythology, you know that the universe was made in 7 days. So that was the 9 days that was. On the 10th day, she reached the city of Elefsina. Eusis is the sound of it in English. There, she met 4 young girls. There was Janet and Simona and Kath and Heather and Diana. It was 5 of them, actually, sorry. And they were the girls, the daughters of the king of Elefsina. So they saw this middle-aged woman looking for her daughter, she said, and although they hadn't seen her, they told her that their parents, the king and queen, had a baby son, but they were kind of past advanced in age and they could not really very well take care of it. So would she be the nanny for their little brother? Maybe in an effort to cover the void she was feeling because of her daughter's disappearance. She said, yes, she would, and she presented herself to the queen. Now, everybody knows that the king there was King Keleos, but they don't know the full story because his actual name was Mike Keleos. So Mike Keleos and the royal couple, Reina Rona, along his side, they took her in. And she said that if you entrust your son to me, I will take very good care of him and he will never come to harm. So they did. They took her in and she started looking after the baby. She said that no harm would find the baby, but she had a very bizarre way of making sure that was the case. Now, at night, when everybody was fast asleep, she would cover the baby in a special ointment that part of it was ambrosia, the food of the gods. She would cover the whole baby up from head to bottom and then place it on the fire, in the fire, so that all the mortal parts would burn. Same way as Achilles' mother, the nymph, had done. Only one night, Reina Rona woke up in the middle of the night and went by to check on her son. And when she saw this, she screamed, "What are you doing?" And interrupted the process, picked up the baby from the fire. And then, of course, the goddess Demetra presented herself in full splendor in front of the mortal. Now the queen was deeply sorry and said, "Believe me, I had no idea. Please, please take my baby. Here, I entrust it to you." But Demetra would have none to do with it. The process had been interrupted, so she was no longer responsible for it. But she had the sons of Mike Keleos, the king, build a temple in her honor, and there she retreated away from the world in her deep sadness. It was there that the sun that goes across the sky and sees everything felt sorry for her and finally revealed the secret that it was Hades, the god of the underworld, that had taken her daughter to his kingdom, the dark and gloomy underworld. When Demetra heard this, she immediately went up to Olympus and demanded to see Zeus. And when she was admitted, she told him that that was the case and that she definitely wanted her daughter back. Now, Zeus, well, he was not one to ask for any other god to give back his beloved? I mean, he was the worst. How could he possibly ask such a thing, let alone from another mighty god as Hades, almost as mighty as Zeus was, actually. So he refused to intervene. Demeter said, He said, no. Yes, okay, that's fine. And she went back to Elefsina, back to her temple, but she had another ass up her sleeve. As form of leverage, she stopped taking care of the earth. And at first, nobody took notice. It was just the grass dying all of a sudden. And there was nothing, no flowers, no fruits on the trees, no crops. All the animals started dying. First, it was the cattle, the big animals. Then the sheep followed. And in the end, it was the people. They started dying in large numbers. Even Hades took notice because suddenly his kingdom was crowded with hordes of mortals, ex-mortal souls. So the gods took notice, of course, and they had to do something to stop this. Zeus sent messengers to her to try to convince her, persuade her to stop doing that, but no, she wouldn't. So in the end, they had to accept her plea. Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger of the gods, all the way down to the underworld to order Hades to release Persephone. Otherwise, all their worshippers would be gone. There would be none left. Hades had to conform, of course. Actually, he had seen it with his own eyes. But even though all this time Persephone had touched no food and kept crying and asking for her mother, he told her that he was giving her back. He begged her to have something, just a little bite, before she went up to her mother. And innocent girl as she was, she took a pomegranate and ate 6 seeds out of it. Then she was sent back to the earth, along with Hermes, back to Demeter. And when the mother and the daughter saw each other, they hugged and they kissed and they laughed and cried at the same time. And all nature was happy with them. There was green grass everywhere. There were blossoms and fruits and flowers. And now Persephone told her mother that Hades had been quite decent, actually. He had been very nice. He had not forced himself upon her. He had actually waited for her to consent. And Demeter asked her if she had eaten anything. And the girl said, yes, she had had 6 seeds of the pomegranate. And Demeter explained that for every seed she had consumed, she would have to spend 1 month every year, 6 months in total, in the underworld with her soon-to-be husband. But at least the other 6 months she would spend on the earth with her mother. And so every year it would be around mid-September, the girl would go down to the gloomy underworld to meet her husband and be the queen. And all nature would be sad along with the goddess. And then in the middle of February, very close to where we are now, you can see nature around you. Cold is going away, nature is recovering, soon there will be flowers. And this is how it has been since back then up to now.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much, Despina. That was wonderful again. So the next batting order, we're going to Chris and then we're going to Rona. But just before we do that, Chris, John Rowe, who's just managed to get himself popped in, wants to talk a few minutes about the young storytellers on Tuesday. So, John, here's your chance, mate. You've got to mute yourself.
Yeah, you could have done it at the end, but it's just to announce every Tuesday we have our Young International Storytellers. This Tuesday, anyone who's got a young person 18 years or under and would like them to come and tell stories, it's 4:30 UK time. It comes on, and you just come. They can just come on the program, just like this, pressing the gold button. So just as you get on, and of course the one after that will be live from the cafe in Marrakesh during the festival, and
I'm sure everybody's looking forward to that. And so it's every Tuesday they have the young storytellers. So if you know any young storytellers, they're always made very welcome there. And the Storytelling Cafe does a really, really fine job getting all these youngsters together from across the world.
We have them from India, from Nigeria, sometimes from Gaza if they can get the internet going, and obviously the UK. So, and anywhere else in the world. Occasionally, Simba, we have someone from Italy even at the moment. Thank you.
Well done, John. Thank you very much. So we're going over to Chris and then to Ernest. I see we've got Kath and Baden. You're both here. Welcome. I haven't seen you, Baden, for a while, and you, Kath. And if you want to tell, do you want to tell a story, Baden? If you do, wave. And same with you, Kath. If you want to do a story, do you want to wave? Do you want to tell a story, Kath? Now you're here.
Have you got time, Mike? Because there's a fair few tellers here tonight.
Well, I'm not doing anything. So and Ali is. We'll see what time we get to when we get.
See how we go. I'll tell one at the end if there's time.
Right.
I don't want to.
So we're going to Chris now. Chris, for those of you who Chris has been here before, but he's one of my oldest storytelling friends, and he comes to our local club in here in Shropshire. It's lovely to see you again, Chris. I like to say you're young and handsome, but that doesn't count for either of us.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm going to tell a story. I hope it's okay from my book called Jack's Rainbow. It's a murder, which you may or may not guess. He was called Thomas when he first moved to the southwest village on the coast. He moved in on the quay from where he could see the boats, a couple of boats that he had then, depart with their cargoes. And gradually he became more and more successful, bought more boats. And as he bought more boats, he prospered from a trick he had learned. The trick was to insure the boats. So it didn't matter really to him whether the boats got to their destinations and got back from their destinations. He profited either way. And as his empire built up, he moved up the hill into bigger and bigger houses until he was at the top of the hill and the eaves of his mansion broke the sky in silhouette. And he became known as One Trip Thomas because his boats only went the one way, often as not. And as the word got round, the women in the village forbade their men to go on a trip with him. They said, if you go, I will not speak to you again. I will leave you with the children. And so none of the men in the village would go, but he prospered nevertheless. And he had horses and a carriage. He had all the rich baubles that a man could want, except for one thing. He wanted a picture from the picture woman. She had come to the village about the same time, and she painted pictures. She sat on the seashore and she dipped her brush into salt water that she got from the sea, and sand that she mixed in with the salt water, or the juices of the seaweed, and she used those as colours in her paintings. So her paintings were as natural as possible. And she would do the same in the woods. She would use the juices from the grasses or the berries and make colours out of them and paint pictures. And the children would gather round and try to see what she was painting. And their parents would tell them off. They stay away from her. She's fey. Stay away from her. If you don't know what fey means, It means sort of magical. And she became also, well, famous, and I suppose prosperous, because she was taken up by the fashionable people in London, and her paintings exchanged hands for many, many pounds. But she would not sell to One Trip Thomas. She didn't trading position, so to speak. Now, there came a time when the economy collapsed. They didn't call it the economy in those days, they called it something else. But we know the story. The economy collapses and people, especially at the bottom, suffer. And the men in the village started to look for work and they couldn't find work. And in the end, some of them started to turn to One Trip Thomas and thinking, we'll go on a voyage, we're that desperate. And their wives said, oh, don't go. But some of them did. In fact, few of them did. And there was much trepidation when the women waved goodbye to their husbands as the boat. And there was much fear indeed, that the boat would. And the picture woman stood on the cliffs, boat sailed away. She had just herself to look after. That was a bit of a mystery, actually. Some said she'd had a son and that had fallen out and he'd gone away. He'd gone to somewhere very far south, somewhere right in the southern oceans, somewhere in Africa, some said. Well, the days and then the months passed and news eventually reached the village that the ship had docked in Cape Town. And it was so successful in trading, etc., that it was going on to Australia. And so it went on to Australia. And they waited and they waited. And then the bell that was installed in the newly created Lloyd's clanged. And if you don't know what that means, the bell is only rung when a ship insured by Lloyd's goes down. And the news reached the village. And the women of the village were full of tears and full of anger towards One Trip Thomas. And in the pubs and in the inns, mumbles started to grow amongst the men as they drank. And then the started to turn to angry shouts. And in the end, yells. And then the torches were moving up the hill, the lighted torches, towards One Trip Thomas' house. As they gathered at the gates, threw stones at the house. And as they were doing so, a figure came up the hill. And they turned, and it was the picture woman. And underneath her arm, she had a parcel, a flattish parcel. And they said, she's going to sell to Thomas. And they all moved forward. And as they moved forward, the woman picked up the lantern that she had in her hand, held it high, and smashed it on the ground in a crescent. And the crescent flames grew up and flared in front of the crowd, and they drew back, pushed through the crowd, no one daring to get anywhere near her. And they watched her go to the house of One Trip and knock on the door. And One Trip came to the door. He spoke to her, she spoke to him, and they went in the house. And about 5-10 minutes later, she came out, no parcel. Oh, she sold, they said. And again, they moved towards her as she came out of the gate. And she pushed them back. And as she passed one of the women, she turned, took out a bag she had got in her skirt, and slapped it in the woman's hand, and it jingled as she did so. And some of the coins, the gold coins, fell onto the floor. Leading down. And in her house, she took out a broadsheet And on the broadsheet, it had a facsimile of One Trip's vessel. And underneath were the list of those who had perished on the vessel. And she took out a pen and circled name list, rolled up the broadsheet in black ribbons, and then put it on the floor. The following morning, One Trip presumably waiting for his breakfast, because his butler was preparing it, and his wife was wittering on about the storm. The storm last night. He said, there was no storm, wife, there was no storm. She said, yes, I heard the wind and the rain bashing at the window. He said, look, there's nothing on the windows, it's perfectly dry. She said, I heard one of the windows smash. She said, that was a brick that the peasants from the village threw. It smashed the windows. Stop bothering me, woman. I've got to take Mr. Thomas his breakfast. And she picked up the tray. He picked up the tray and started to walk up the stairs. And as he came to the first landing, the steps gradually revealed the feet or the shoes of One Trip. And then the butler saw the body of One Trip lying on the carpet. The carpet was soaked, absolutely soaked. The butler couldn't make out what was happening. At first he thought someone must have broken in and smashed one of the other windows. He looked across to the wall because he knew his master had put the picture that he'd bought from the picture woman on the wall. The picture was of the boat that had gone down. It pictured the boat in trouble. Well, they took One Trip away. And the local doctor, who had been a seafaring man, had performed a primitive autopsy on it. He was a scientist, a bit of a nerd, I suppose. And he had decided to analyse the water that had been found in One Trip's lungs. How it had got there on the landing of a stair, he didn't know. But what really puzzled him were the organisms he found in the water. He had only found those organisms in all his journeys in the southern seas of the globe.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well done, mate. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear your stories, mate. And by the way, it's a very good book, and I've got a signed copy. Right. Right. So, Rona, I'm not seeing you. Are you there, mate? I'm just seeing a picture of you from about 3 weeks ago. Right. So something's happened. Here she comes. Oh, there you are. No, hang on, you're gone again. There she is, yeah. Now you're muted now.
Thanks for your patience, Mike. Yeah, I had a story in mind to tell tonight.
Sorry, just before you go ahead, Ron, I just want to say it's going to be Heather, Keith, and Diana in that order. Okay. So Heather, you're next, mate. Okay. Sorry, Hannah, away you go.
I had been saying that I was going to tell a Greek story, and then having heard Despina, I thought, I don't know about that now, but Despina has asked me to tell it, so thank you, Despina, that's very kind. I ain't going to do it the kind of justice that you've just given to Dimitri and Persephone, but anyway, it's one of my favourites, so I'm letting you have it. Go on. There was nothing different about this particular village in Greece that you would have said from any other village in Greece, except for one thing. On the road up to the village, there was a huge puddle on the road. Nobody could get their head round this. where did this puddle come from? And why every time it was cleared away did it come back? It hadn't rained for months. The ground was dry underneath. This was just so strange. But it brought visitors to the village as well, but not as many who came to see young Ari. Ari was a beautiful, beautiful young girl. And she had a special talent. She could weave, and she could weave tapestries that looked as if the characters on them could just step right out. But there was a problem. There was one or two problems with her, actually. Ari was very vain, disrespectful, argumentative, unhelpful. Just about everything you wouldn't want your daughter to be, Ari was it, except she was very talented. And her mother used to say to her frequently, you know, you need to show thanks, young lady. You need to show the gods that you are, you know, you feel that you've been trusted with this skill and you should do good with it. Don't talk rubbish, Mother. You know, everybody's born able to do something, but it's just that some of us are more skilled than others. And some of us are more beautiful than others. Our mother was shocked at this. I mean, she really worried about this girl's vanity because she knew it was not going unnoticed. And she was right. When Ari one day actually had the temerity to say, not only was she the best weaver that she'd ever seen, but she believed herself to be the best weaver in the world. In fact, she believed herself to be the best weaver in the next world. She didn't think even any of the gods would be able. Her mother said, shh, you foolish girl, don't say another word. But it was too late because Athena had already heard her. Oh, she thinks so, does she? I think I'll have to pay that young woman a visit. And a few days later, walking up the village to go and see Ari, an old wizened old lady was trying to circumnavigate her way around this puddle. And then when she got to Ari's door, she knocked on the door and asked to speak to Ari. And it was she who had opened it. She said, "I'm Ari, how can I help you?" And she was looking the old woman up and down as if she was worth nothing. "I would like to see some of your weavings." "Are you going to buy one?" said Ari. "Well, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to decide if I liked them enough. But if you liked them enough, you'll never see anything better." Athena couldn't contain herself. And she decided that she wasn't going to wait 1 minute longer to teach this girl a lesson. So she said to her, "I too am a weaver. I can weave the most incredible..." "What, you? You're an old woman. You can't think for 1 minute that your tapestries would be better than mine." "Yes, I do," she said, "actually. I would like to challenge you, in fact." "Really?" "Oh, well, if you think you must, fine. What would you like the challenge to be?" And Athena said, "Are you familiar with the gods?" And Ari looked at her mother, who was stood frozen to the spot in fear. Who was this old woman? What was this? What was going on? And Ari turned and said, "Yes, of course I am." She said, "Well, I would like both of us to do a weaving, a tapestry of the gods. And whichever one is the best will be declared the finest weaver." Okay, so 3 days from now. "I don't need 3 days," said Ari. What about tomorrow? Or the day after, if that's not long enough for you? The day after tomorrow will be fine. And so the challenge was set. And 2 days later, Athena was back at the door, dressed as the old lady. And Ari invited her in to see her tapestry. Oh my God. Athena couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it, but this was the finest tapestry she had ever seen. There was just one little problem. This despicable, disrespectful child had dishonored the gods. She had weakened them in caricature. She had given Zeus a huge wart on his nose. Others had donkey's ears or long curled up chins, grotesque looking, but nevertheless absolutely incredible. And she had to admit that Ari's tapestry was better than hers. And she said to her, "My dear, you've won. Your tapestry is finer than mine." "I know," said Ari, "and I knew it would be." Oh, well, that was enough. Athena disrobed this old woman's disguise that she had on. And there stood before Ari now was the goddess Athena. Whatever else she wasn't stupid. Ari dropped to her knees and begged Athena for forgiveness. She had depicted Athena with acne. It doesn't get much more insulting than that when you are the most beautiful woman ever. But that was not what bothered Athena, because Athena was not vain. What bothered her was how Zeus had been depicted. She said, "You have two wonderful gifts, my dear child. You have your weaving and you have your beauty. Which one would you like to keep?" "Oh no, please let me keep, because if you take my beauty, then I'll never find a husband in this village. I was going to Athens and I was going to..." "I can save you the trouble, my dear. I've already made up my mind. You can keep your weaving skills because you're going to need them. I'm going to take your beauty. I'm going to transform you into one of the ugliest little creatures. In fact, you're going to be the first of its kind." And she placed her hand on Arachne's head, because now she was Arachne, not Ari. Arachne was her full name. She pushed her all the way down to the floor, and as her body spread and these 8 black hairy legs appeared and these 2 huge red eyes, Ari saw herself, and she could not believe it, and she scurried into the corner. "Yes," said Athena, "that's where you will live, and you will use your wonderful weaving skills to weave your web, your home, and you will spawn hundreds of others just like you. And everybody will hate and detest you. They will run from you. They will hide from you. And you are going to live for a very, very long time." And with that, she turned and left. But before she left the village, she walked down to the road that she had come up, and she took one look at that puddle and thought, I don't know what that's doing there, but I think it must be a bit of a nuisance for the villagers, so I'll take it with me. And she did.
Oh, Rona, thank you very much. That was a beautiful story, well told. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, so a friend of mine, good old Stanley Robinson, used to say that all the women in the Highlands are the most beautiful women of all, because their personalities matches their mountains and the heather matches the glow of their skins. And so we have two people, I think, from Scotland. I want Heather, who's going to go next, and Diana a bit later on. And he always used to say things like that about the women of the Highlands because he loved every one of them. So Heather from the Highlands, you've got to tell us tonight.
Yes, yeah. Though I'm going to tell you a story from the Lowlands, though.
Oh, okay.
But that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a village that was wonderful, Rona. By the way, I love your telling of that story, and it's nice to have two Greek myths, two Greek stories tonight. That's fantastic. This story comes from near a wee town called Moffat in the borders of Scotland, and it's quite an important wee town historically. But this is, if you go to Moffat, and just outside of it, in the hills nearby, high up in the hills, there's a loch called Loch Skene. And there's a burn that runs off the loch, and it falls down the hillside. Beautiful waterfall. It falls 60 metres to the glen. It's the highest waterfall in the lowlands of Scotland. And it is called the Grey Mare's Tale. And this is the story of how it got its name. And it's an ancient story. It's a very old story that goes back in time to when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, when they were sent off out of the garden in disgrace. It was a sad day when that happened. And there went Adam and Eve into the unknown. They were frightened and scared about what was ahead of them in this new world. And Eros, he felt rather sorry for them. He was worried for them because he knew how scared they were, and he didn't like the idea of them going off into this new place and without a wee bit of comfort. And he thought, well, he could give that to Adam and Eve and their children and their children's children. He could give them love and happiness so that they could go forth into this new world with a little bit of comfort and joy. And so he followed them out of the Garden of Eden on the back of his grey mare with his bag of arrows that had been dipped in love and happiness. And away he went. Well, that was fine, except that Satan, the devil wasn't very happy about this. I mean, he was absolutely furious, actually, because he had grand plans. His master plan was for Adam and Eve to go off into the world and for humanity for the rest of its days to be surrounded by misery and pain and hatred and all the horrible and nasty things. He didn't like the idea of any good things happening to mankind. He didn't want love and happiness and joy and all of that nonsense. So he set off after Eros to stop him. Well, he was still disguised as that serpent, and he slithered away as fast as he could, following that grey mare. But I tell you, that grey mare, she was as swift and nimble as an arrow flying through the air, and she was hard to catch. So Satan chased Eros and that grey mare for year after year, century after century, until finally, one day, he was getting close. He was really close behind Eros, and he was getting quite excited, was the devil. Eros arrived on the island of Ireland with the devil close behind. But what do you know? St. Patrick had sorted things to make sure that no serpents, no snakes could come to Ireland. And so Satan couldn't get across, couldn't land.
I think she's gone from home. She's frozen.
She's stuck in a Disney movie.
Yeah, I'm going to count to 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, I'm going to move on, and if Heather comes back, we'll fit her in again, and we'll get to we'll get her to do the start of the story again. So I think something's happened. Now she's gone completely now, I think. So there's the Highlands. It's a bit blustery down here in the UK at the moment, and there's storms across. So I'm going to go to Keith at Lincolnshire, which is what I said we were going to do. Then you, Diana, are you in the Highlands as well, Diana? You're not too. How's the weather with you? It's okay, right, okay, fine. Well, we're going to go Keith, and then we're going to go Diana, and we're going to cross our fingers that Heather comes back. So Keith, over to Lincolnshire, my old friend.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to tell a story, a true story, about my great-great-grandfather. One or two of you maybe heard this before, but it's the right time of year in the winter. It's a winter tale, and also it has a touch of romance, and it's the 14th of February coming up soon, St. Valentine's Day, so that's sort of touch on there as well. Well, my great-great-grandfather was named Jabus Butters, and everybody called him Jeb. And he lived in a little village of South Ormsby in the middle of the Lincolnshire Wolds. Now, he was a bootmaker. He wasn't a cobbler, he was a bootmaker. He could make a pair of boots from scratch, cutting out the leather, stitching it together, putting on the soles and the studs, holes for the laces and lacing it all up. Handmade boots and shoes. Now, one winter's day, when he was a young man, he'd been working in the bootmaker's shop next to his thatched cottage, the Thack. And he'd arranged to go and see his girlfriend, and she lived and worked in South Ormsby Hall, Ormsby Hall. Now, normally he couldn't go and see her because the maids and the people that worked there and lived in the hall weren't allowed visitors, but he knew that the squire and his family were away. And so towards the end of this day, he damped down the fire in the bootmaker's workshop, and he went next door to the Thack, and he took off his apron and his old clothes, his old trousers, and he changed into his better trousers, and he put on his coat and his hat, and he set off from the Thack. And he walked down into the village. And as he walked along a few hundred yards, there was Ring Hill over to the left. And that was the road to Thetford. And he was thinking, oh, I must go and see Mr. Smith because I've got his boots ready. A little bit further on the hillside, there was St. Leonard's Church. And again, he thought, I must go and see the vicar because he must arrange to sort out the marriage of his girlfriend. His girlfriend was called Harriet. A little bit further on, he passed, on the left-hand side, he passed the old school. And I actually have two photographs of the children of that school, and it was in 1894. And there's a whole picture of the girls in one picture and a photograph of the boys in the other picture. And there's a little plaque which says South Ormsby School, 1894. And it's actually the young lad that's holding it is actually Jabez. Because in those days, for generations, families would live in one village from generation to generation. And so he walked on past the school. And he was walking down the lane, and over on the left-hand side, there was the hall. And there he saw, flying out from the lake in front of the hall, 2 ducks as they flew across the park that was dotted with trees. But he carried on down the lane. He didn't go in the main entrance, the main driveway to the hall, but he carried on. And then he came to the Massenburg Arms, which is a pub that is still there, actually, and still serves a good pint. And as he looked through the window, he could see the landlord there. He was stoking up the fire, getting the bar ready, the place ready for guests later on. Just beside the pub, there was the blacksmith shop. And Mr. Crow, he'd damped down the forge, and he was coming out of the door, and he saw Jabez. Jabez said, "Now, Jab, you fancy a pint later on?" No, Mr. Crow, I've got something to do tonight." Mr. Crow smiled and he winked and said, "Hey, I know. Perhaps we'll have a pint another night." And he went off home. So Jabez carried on and he came to a crossroads. And if he'd carried on straight down into Catesby and up to Wormsgate, it had come to a place that many centuries before Jabez lived in Ormsby, there lived a dragon. But that's another story. Jabez, he turned left onto the Bluestone Heath Road, which is an old Celtic road, later to be taken over by the Romans. And he walked a few hundred yards down Bluestone Heath Road, and he turned left again into the back driveway and the back entrance of Ormsby Hall. And he went and he knocked on the door, and his girlfriend Harriet opened the door and smiled, and they hugged and kissed. And they spent the evening in the parlour, hugging and kissing and doing what young people do. And it came to the time when they had to go home. And he opened the back door and he looked down. He said, "Lass, I can't go out of there. There's inch and a half of snow. Everybody will know I've been to sea and you'll get in trouble. Tell you, lass, let me out the front door." "Jabes," he said, "it's more my job's to have to let you through the hall, and I can't do that." "Lass, just trust me." And so, by the light of a candle, they made their way through the hall to the front entrance. And he kissed his girlfriend Harriet goodnight and opened the door. Without a word of a lie, he stepped out backwards into the snow, onto the doorstep. He mantled around and he walked backwards all the way down the main drive, which maybe as far as maybe a quarter of a mile, until he reached the path, the lane that he'd just been walking along earlier on that night. And then he went on, because there's lots of other people been walking up on the lane, and so he was able to walk up and down. They'd been walking up and down, but he walked back to the thack and went to bed that night thinking, I got away with that. But next morning, there were some servants and a maid and a hostler and a gardener. They were coming to work because they lived in the village. And they looked down and they saw these footprints in the snow on the main drive. And they said, "Wow, look there. The squire's home, we're going to get in trouble because we're a bit late to work. What we got to do?" Until they found out that it was Jabez that had been to see his girlfriend the previous night. Now, that story was told to me by my father. And I told that story at an old people's home in Alford a few years ago now. And there was an old chap there called Mr. Holgath. And after I told that story, he said, hey, I knew old Jeb and I knew what he got up to that night. It's absolutely true. And so, just goes to show, you shouldn't go a-courting on a snowy night.
Thank you very much there. That's absolutely great. So we're going to go to Diana. And Ali, if you're there, can we go on for a few minutes still? Because I've still got another couple to fit in yet.
Hi, I'll be brief anyway.
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely.
Okay. This is an old story that a lot of people will know. There might be more than one version, but anyway, this is it. So it's set at the bottom of the Catskill Mountains, and it's a beautiful place. It's not far from the Hudson River. And all the women that stay in this settlement long, long ago, well, they believe that they can tell the weather by just looking up at the Catskill Mountains. And if it's blue and purple at the top, then that means it's going to be a really nice day. And they can get their washing out and the kids will be running about to play. But if it's kind of misty at the top, well, that's not so good. Or if it's really quite a dark grey or black, well, that's a totally different story altogether. But there was this Dutch settlement nearby to there. There were quite a number of houses and, well, it was a close-knit community. And there was one guy, well, he was very well known throughout the whole village. And the reason he was well known is he was always outside, or he was always communicating with the people, or he was a fond person for entertaining the kids. And he would sit there, he would tell them stories, he would play games with them, he would blow bubbles, he would play hopscotch, whatever you wanted. He always had time. But you know, he didn't have time for other things. Yes, he also had time for taking his dog for a walk. He also had time for his cronies in the pub. But did he have time for his wife? And she was so busy. You are dead right, Baden. He did not. Well, this was not a good start. But anyway, he just, well, he turned off. You see, she did go on a bit. She wouldn't just go on. She'd go on and on and on and on and on and on. And he would just get so fed up and he would look askance and he would just ignore her. And that used to really rile her. But well, he could always just go with the dog. He could go and see his friends. She had 4 children and they had a patch of ground and they had to grow their crops in there, their vegetables, whatever. And it was hard, you know, when it came to mending the fence, oh, he would go and help a neighbour. But would he help his own wife to make sure that their little bit was all protected and the animals couldn't get in and eat their vegetables or whatever? So, and he just really, well, I would say he definitely had slopey shoulders. He wasn't a man for responsibility. So it wasn't really surprising when this particular day he would go for a walk and he took his dog with him and his dog was called Wolf. And him and the dog were great companions because they always used to go off away from the nagging wife, away from all the noise of the children, away from anything that remotely resembled responsibility. And off they would go. And he had his gun with him. Well, he would go, and at least when his wife looked out the window and saw him going off with the dog and with the gun on his shoulder, well, they would probably eat well that night because he would shoot a rabbit or a chicken or whatever he could lay his hands on. So at least that would be something. But well, off he went on his walk, Wolf by his side, and it's a lovely day. And he gets to the bottom of the Catskill Mountains and he thinks to himself, I wonder, will I go up today? And he looks up at the top and it looks like it's a good day for going up. So off he goes and he starts climbing up and he goes round and round. And it's great having Wolf for company and his thoughts just clear as a day in his head, nothing really troubling him. You know, he's a very contented person at that time. So up he goes, and after a while, they stop and they have a rest, and he thinks he hears something. He hears something like, but he can't think what it is. But anyway, they just carry on going. And then he sees this little man who's not very big at all, who has long hair and a long beard. And he's also wearing these like velvet breeches and a waistcoat and a shirt underneath with kind of fancy ruffles at the edges. He looks pretty smart with his boots on. But the man doesn't talk. And what he does do is beckon to Rip and says, over here, over here. And he says, look, can you help me? Because he's trying to balance this barrel on his shoulder. And it looks quite heavy and he's maybe getting tired. So Rip being Rip, he always helps everybody else. He will take the barrel on his shoulder. And up he goes and Wolf goes too. And eventually they come to this clearing. And there's not just this one little guy. There's quite a lot of them. But the funny thing is, they're all quite dour, or dour, as we say in Scotland. They're all looking pretty cheesed off, sad, fed up. And he doesn't quite understand why. But they're playing this game. And the game that they're playing is 9 pins. And they've got the bowls, all the pins lined up. And then along comes the ball and whack. And that's what he'd heard when they were coming up. Sometimes a few going in, one after the other. Well, he watches them. And this little old man, he says, he kind of beckons to him and he shows him the drinks and the tray. And okay, Rip gets the idea. He's meant to go round and give out the drinks. And of course, he smells them. And they're better than whiskey, and they're better than cider, definitely. And they're better than any kind of dark ale he's ever seen in his life. So he has some. And oh, it's pretty good. So he continues on for a while giving out the drinks. But then he starts to feel a bit sleepy. And he sits down beside his dog and he has some more to drink. And then he puts his mug down. And within a very short space of time, he's gone fast asleep. Wolf beside him. Well, he wakens up. And goodness me, the sun is shining. It's a new day. What on earth is he going to say to Dame Van Winkle? What kind of excuse will he have? Will she fall for it? Probably not. But anyway, he was here at this present moment. And he turned round to see Wolf. And Wolf wasn't there. And he couldn't understand it. And he was surprised. He thought he hadn't slept the whole night, but he thought he must have. So what must have happened was Wolf the dog must have run off and gone off to the river or something. So he shouts, Wolf, Wolf, Wolf. But there's no animal comes back. So he's scratching his head and he's thinking, this is getting quite puzzling. And I wonder what they put in that drink that I had last night. But anyway, not to worry, he gets up, he can't see these men, they're all disappeared. There's no 9 pins, there's no barrels. Did he really dream it? So he decides that he'll go down and he's scratching his chin and he thinks, wait a minute, what's this? What's this? He maybe had some stubble before, but now he's got this great long beard. And then he felt his hair. And his hair is long. And that couldn't have happened overnight. And what on earth is going on? And he's beginning to feel that he doesn't know. Is there something wrong with him? Is he going mad? Well, he stood out and he looked over to the Hudson River and he thought, at least that's in the same place. So, and the Catskill Mountains, he was still standing on them. And he looked over to the right and he saw a group of people and he thought, I must go down. Everybody knows Rip Van Winkle. So when I tell them who I am, they will know and it'll all become apparent what's happened. And I'm sure there's a good explanation. So he goes down towards the people, but nobody looks over at him. Nobody recognizes him. And he just doesn't know. He's really at a loss. So he doesn't intrude at that point. What he does do is go and try and find his house. So he walks over and he walks over, but where his house was, well, there's still this bit of a building there, but it's pretty ramshackle. And everything is all over the place and there's nobody living there. And now he's really beginning to get worried. And he sits down and he thinks, what's happened to his wife? What's happened to all his children? His neighbors? So we must go over and interrupt this group of people. But, you know, when he starts asking for people like Van Bummel, who used to be the headmaster, they say that he's dead now. And Nicholas Vedder, what about him? He's one of my cronies. We used to sit outside the pub, the King George III pub, and we used to chat away to each other. Oh, Nicholas Vedder, he's passed away as well. And the pub was no longer King George III, because goodness me, there'd been a huge amount of change, because this was the United States of America, and this was General Washington pub that was there. Everything had changed. He didn't know if he was on his head or his heels. So he looked around the people and he thought he recognized one that looked really quite like his wife. But he wasn't sure. And she was looking at him as well, as much as to say, do I know this person? Do I know this man? And they got closer. And he said, look, I'm trying to explain to everybody that I'm Rip Van Winkle. And he saw her eyes just about coming out of her head. And she said, you're Rip Van Winkle. You must be you're my daughter, you're Gilda. And he looked her in the eye and he realized this was Gilda's eldest daughter. The last time he saw her was when she was 12 years old. 12 years old. Wow, she was a grown woman. She'd filled out. She had a young son. She had a farmer for a husband. Wow. And of course, he had to ask her, what's happened to Mum? What's happened to my wife? And she said, oh, well, she passed away. And she looked him straight in the eye and she said, she had a hard life, you know. She had a very hard life. Because Gilda, when she was 12, she had watched her mum. And okay, her mum nagged, but her mum had all the responsibility. She had to look after those 4 kids, make sure they were fed and clothed. She had to look after the house. She had to get the vegetables from the garden. She had to try, if she did have time, to mend that fence. Meanwhile, what was Rip doing? Well, he was out with the dog, or he was at the pub with his cronies, and she'd never forgotten that. And she wasn't going to let her dad forget it. But at the same time, he was her dad. And she had missed him. So then she introduced him to her husband and to her children, her child. There was another one on the way. It wouldn't be long. And then she said to him, well, we'll maybe get to the bottom of this adventure of yours, Dad. You can come and stay with us. You obviously can't stay in our old house. But things are a bit different now. Things are definitely a bit different. You're going to have to pull your weight. You're going to have to do something, not just chat to the neighbours and play with the kids outside. Oh, no, no. But, she said, I'll be fair. I will give you some free time as well. But in that time that he came to stay with them, Gilda explained why she felt the way she did, why she felt sorry for their mum. And Rip began to realise, all right, it was a bit too late, but he began to realise what he'd put his wife through. And when they'd first married, it had never been like that. They had been very much together as a couple. But anyway, here he was, and he had this second chance to improve himself with his daughter and their family. And so, I mean, he'd spent 20 years sleeping, so he really had to get himself sorted out and making up for lost time. And who knows, I never heard him after that. All I remember as a child is Rip Van Winkle sleeping all the time, or else skiving off. But who knows, maybe if I go to the Catskill Mountains, I'll be able to find a bit more out about the story. And I hope I do get there someday.
Oh, lovely. Lovely, 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 Diana. You just have a beguiling way of telling stories. I do appreciate your style. I really do. Right.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, Baden, I'm not getting any messages from Ali, and they seem to be fine over there. And you would be the last person tonight. I know you came in late, but there is an opportunity here if you want to do a story. And I'm not doing anything else. I went nipped out. I'm here by myself. So I must admit I nipped out because my normal servant, who I've been married to since 1977, didn't sneak me a beer in. Okay. So that was all that was. So over to you.
I just choked when you said that, Mike. You know, when you said your servant, I had this really big lump in my throat and I just couldn't do anything about it.
Well, I think she's been really lucky being married to me all these years.
Not going to go there.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to tell you what the rest of us think.
Listen, Baden, give
everybody else is going to Baden, so you might as well join in.
Diana, when you come to the States, you have family and friends.
Lovely.
Baden,
I'm gonna actually be a little bit cheeky, and because we've run over time so long, I'm gonna actually do a short poem, if that's okay with everybody. And
I tell you what, that's not just okay, that's very, very okay. I've been trying to encourage poets to come for a long time, so that's very, very okay. So.
Thank you, Mike. And because there's been a lot of talk today about anniversaries, I was invited to be part of something that happened in Liverpool back in 2010 now, which would have been, I think, John Lennon's 60th birthday. And a friend of mine organized a celebration for it. And there was this poetry slam, which I was part of. I didn't take part in the slam. I don't do that. But I was part of the MC crew, and I also was the sacrificial poet. So I wrote a piece for it, which I performed to kind of get the event going and get the judges' juices going. They were very kind to me, much kinder than I thought they were going to be. And the piece that I wrote for that, which I performed that night, I'm going to share with you. It's called quite simply Poem for John Lennon. And if you know the Beatles music, which I'm sure a lot of you do, you'll recognize where the inspiration for this piece came from. It's my favorite Beatles song, Poem for John Lennon. He from way up northern, he nowhere no flat cap. He be more than icon, he say what he want to. He sang, come together, whispered, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. Here come the madman he took, sure aim slowly he got, fatal dead eye he be, homicidal. He did. 4 times. Shattered the silence of an uneventful New York night. Silenced the voice of a generation. slaughtered a Goliath who spoke only truth, his and that of others, leaving us to mourn and wonder at the beauty of his fevered imagination. Now, he thrive way up yonder, he be. Magic spirit he know, plasma phantom he gone, live forever, that's why we all come together. Just like he say.
Great. Oh, lovely. Baden, there's a tiny little village out on the Welsh coast called Abu Dhabi. And John Lennon used to go there. There's pictures of him all over there. And it's a wonderful, it's a place that he used to go and hide, they tell me. I've been going there an awful long time. So I'm going to call it to an end, but just before we go, Despina wants to say something about an online event that she's going to do. So if you all unmute yourselves, I would very much like to say thank you very much for this evening. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. All I have to do is sit here and listen to an awful lot of some very fine people take some very fine stories. Despina, what did you want to say?
Oh, thank you, thank you. I just wanted to let everybody know that this Tuesday at 7:15 UK time, there will be an online event with the Lichfield Storytellers. They have the international tellers with yours truly part of it. So you're all very welcome to come join us if you like. Yeah.
Right, and so as this is in conjunction with the Get a Word in Edgeways Festival, which is ours, we've got a concert on Thursday. We have one the second Thursday of every month that Amy Douglas sorts out. And I know there's all sorts of different storytellers and things. I just must admit, I don't know who she's booked this month, but I know that there's some great, there always are. I'd like to say thank you to a couple of people, Donald and Chris in particular, and Keith, Rona and Diana. You've been here for the whole of this couple of hours or so, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you for joining in and contributing. But most of all, I'd like to say thank you to Ali, who sits there in Marrakesh in the middle of Morocco and sorts all this out and makes it so easy for me. It is unbelievable. And thank you very much, Ali. And so I will see you all in a fortnight.
Okay.
Just I got your message that you didn't want to tell a story, and thank you for being there as well. You've just come on as the face. I thought you'd gone.
Let me step in for John Rowe for just a moment. Let me step in for John Rowe for just a moment.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. But in a fortnight's time, I'm going to MC a concert. I'm going to be in England because I can't get to Morocco this year for all sorts of personal reasons. But I'm going to MC this from here, and everybody else is going to be in Morocco, I think. And I'm going to probably cry when they finish, but we won't go into that. Okay. Go on then, Baba.
I'm missing you already, but I have a short and quick note, and that's don't forget this Tuesday when we have our young international storytellers at 4:30 British time. But you're going to have to tune in Tuesday to find out what's upcoming because only John Rowe knows.
He is a bit
forward.
busy at the moment. But
yes.
As for world time, it comes under the category. Time comes under the category as me being an Englishman in the UK is what is ours, what was ours, and what should have been ours. It's done at Greenwich, and everybody has to look into us. I'm going to call it now, and I'm going to say, Ali, we're over. Thank you very much.
See you in Marrakesh, Ali, and others.
Yeah, see everybody there. Okay.
Take care. Mike, I'm missing you already.
Great night.
Yeah.
Take care. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Baden, for coming in. Mate. Okay.
All right, everyone. Take care.
Stay safe, everybody. Stay safe. Bye.
Take care, Rona. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Donald and Mike have a shot of whiskey for me. Baden, have a shot of rum.
I will see you soon. I'll leave yours. See you soon. Bye all.
See you soon.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Ali.
It's coming down. Yeah, that's the three of us then. Bye. Okay.
Hey,
I think
You're-
I'm not
you're
sure Ali's
terrific.
still there, actually, to be fair. I think he's probably gone out a cup of tea somewhere.
You're terrific, Mike. I enjoy what you do.
Oh, well, thank you very much for saying so. That's very nice. But the
Oh, no,
idea is
I speak truth.
Well,
And even though you might not think you do anything, you in continuity, and your presence would sorely be missed during this session. So thank you.
I've been doing this now. Our storytelling club was 30 years old 5 years before the pandemic.
Wow.
So I've been doing this since my 20s, and I find, yes, and I thoroughly enjoy it, which what's come when I do this up at Whitby Folk Week, which is a place on the coast in Yorkshire. You will have to come to sometime. We'll organise it. You'd love Whitby Folk Week. We'll introduce you to the Morris men. Okay.
I'm excited. I'm told that after I told you going to Marrakesh would be my first international flight. And I'm told that I will probably wind up doing a lot more flying after this. We'll see.
Let's see where it all happens. I'm gonna leave myself because I want Ali to go. Okay.
All right, I'm going to. Take care. Until the next time. See you later, Rafiki Yangu.